In this lesson, we're talking about how will you prepare for quality control. We're going to talk about writing down your QC requirements. We're going to talk about confirming the QC dates, and we're going to talk about learning basic QC checks. So will you write down your QC requirements? I highly recommend it. And you can either do it by yourself or you can hire a third-party QC company to do it for you or help you do it. The easiest way to do it is by creating the tech pack and just doing a great tech pack that's super detailed. Because basically the tech pack are the instructions for the factory exactly what to do. And if the factory follows all the instructions in the tech pack, the end product will be perfect. And the last way to write down your QC requirements is in what I call the production contract, which we'll talk about in lesson 14. But the production contract will list out all the key points related to quality control that the factory needs to know and follow. So here you see just a basic quality control checklist that I got off the internet. And it's checking a shirt, a pant, and a polo. So it's just the same chart checks repeated 3 times. If you notice right under shirt QC check, it says size, and then there's a box for length, the chest, the stomach, the sleeve, the shoulder. So those would be like measurements, like numbers, inches or centimeters. And one thing that's missing is the tolerance, allowed tolerance. So that'd be helpful to have there for the QC person to know. And also, well, it doesn't say for what size. So I would have a little box that says like for size, and then a place for the QC checker to write in small, medium, or large. Then you have just like a go, no go little chart that like buttons. I would presume you could put in the number of buttons. If there's supposed to be 5 buttons and there's 5 buttons, you can put in the number 5, or let's say there's a missing button, you could put 4/5. Or it could just be a checklist, like buttons are good, the fusing and collar and cuff and placket are good, check, labels good, check. So there's many different ways that you can create a quality control checklist. And you can either create it yourself or you can use third-party QC company checklists. When will you do QC checks? So as I mentioned earlier, there's 2 times that you should do QC. One is at the very beginning. We call them inline inspections. So as soon as the factory is entering the style or the product into a line, you want to have somebody there at least half the day, if not the full day, to just watch and look for any problems and catch them early. Bring them to the attention of the factory and resolve them right then and there. And that's the second check, which is the final QC check. That's after all the garments are made, packaged, and put into carton boxes and sealed. Then either you or a third-party QC company will come in, randomly choose boxes, open them up, take them out, undo the packaging, and put the garment or the toiletry bag or whatever out on the table and do a proper quality control check. And we'll talk more about how that's done, because one thing I want you to remember from this course is that you almost never do 100% inspection. So then the question is, how many do you inspect? We'll talk about that in a minute. What quality control checks do you need to know? In fact, you don't need to know any if you want to have a hands-off approach, in which case you would just be relying on a third-party QC company. And as I mentioned earlier, the industry standard is you pay $250 per man day for one qualified QC technician to come in and check your goods. Know that quality control is an industry that's worth billions of dollars. There's quality control being done all around the world in all manufacturing facilities. My advice is just learn some of the basics, and I'm going to share with you some of the basics right now that are related to soft goods. Of course, doing quality control for metal manufacturing, wood manufacturing, or chemical or food manufacturing is different. But my expertise is in soft goods. So here's some of the basic QC checks. One is measurements. Pretty straightforward. Just need to know where to measure and what the tolerances are. Seam allowance. It's usually 7 millimeters and up, and you can measure that with a measuring tape. Stitches per inch. It's hard to measure, but if you're doing the inline inspections, you can see what the sewing machines are set at. The sewing machines have dials and measurements, and the sewers, they set the machine at a certain stitches per inch. But the stitches per inches can also be affected by the speed at which the sewers push the fabric or guide the fabric underneath the sewing machine. So if you do a visual inspection and it seems like the stitches per inch is not where they're supposed to be, which is 10 stitches per inch is an industry standard, it could be because of the way that the speed at which the operators are pushing the fabric. And you can also maybe check, two different sewing lines have different sewers, and those sewers might be, pushing the fabric at a different speed. And you can do that by checking the same style coming out of two different lines and just visually comparing the stitches per inch. And if they're not the same, raise your hand and discuss it with the factory. Then there's color fastness. The last thing you want is for your customers to wash, say, a red garment in with other colors, and the red dye bleeds into the other garments in the wash machine. And the color fastness scale is 1 to 5, 1 being very low color fastness and 5 being perfect color fastness. 4 is kind of an industry standard target. 4.5 is hard to achieve, and the factories will ask for a higher price if you ask them to live up to a higher color fastness. Then there's also pilling. Pilling is where, like two pieces of fabric rub together, and then you get this beading, which doesn't look good and doesn't have a nice hand feel. So pilling is bad, and the scale is 1 to 5. Have a discussion with the fabric as to what pilling standard they can guarantee, and make sure you do a pilling test if you're concerned about pilling. And the factory has to prove to you that the pilling reaches a certain standard. Next is AQL level, which is a huge topic and it's super important. I strongly recommend that you watch this video. This video explains AQL very well. It's acceptable quality limit, and a standard acceptable quality limit, AQL limit, is 2.5. Basically, the idea is you never do 100% inspection. It'd be too expensive and it would take too long. So then the question is, how many do I have to inspect in order to get statistically correct results, to know that if I inspect 10% of the total goods, that the other 90% will have the same frequency of major, minor, and critical defects. And if the sample size is correct and the number of major, minor, and critical defects are below are acceptable, then the other 90% that you did not check are also acceptable. So that's AQL in a nutshell. But watch this video; it explains it very well. Next is care label artwork. So number one, you need to study the care labeling requirements of the country that you're selling in. So it's different for every country, and you can just Google it online, and the governments all have websites that clearly explain what the care labeling requirements are. And then just make sure that in the tech pack, it's clearly illustrated. And then when they make the care labels, before they sew them onto the garments, you just do a visual inspection and make sure that they're correct. And we talked about doing inline inspection. That's just doing just basic idiot checks to see anything that's clearly wrong and catch it early. And then the final third-party QC inspection, most likely you're going to hire a third-party QC company. And knowing the sample size, which is part of AQL, that's important. And then defining what is a critical defect, what is a major defect, and what is a minor defect. And that's part of the AQL system. And we talk more about that in lesson 16. Having the conversation with the factory about the inspection dates are also very important. Because if you are going to do inline inspections and a third-party QC inspection, you want to know exactly what dates. And I can tell you from experience, whatever they tell you, most likely will be off by a couple of days. And the last thing you want to do is they tell you it's going to be on the 30th of October. You fly in on the 29th expecting to go to the factory on the 30th, and then they drop a bomb on you and say, oh, we're behind schedule and it's not going to happen until 3 days later. So you have to sit around in your hotel room for 2 or 3 days waiting, and time is money. So before you make a deposit, get them to commit to the inline inspection date and the third-party QC date, but just learn from my personal experience that those dates will most likely be off. And just, before you book your tickets or before you book the third-party QC company to be there on a certain date, just constantly be double checking with the factory. How are we doing? Did we get all the trims and accessories in on time? Is the fabric in the factory and inspected? Are we on schedule with production? And just anticipate changes to the day that they start production and the day that they'll finish it. So that's very important. All right. So in summary, I've written a book that goes into much more detail about quality control, and it's free, part of the resources of this course. I strongly recommend you read it. And in summary, you want to tell them what your QC expectations are in writing. You want to lock in the inspection dates and learn as much QC knowledge as you can before you work with the factory for the first time. So in the next lesson, we're going to be talking about how to find factories in Vietnam. See you in the next lesson.